Hello, hello. Welcome back to Hot Girls Pray, a Christian podcast where we're going to talk about all things Jesus, culture, and just your walk with the Lord. I'm your host, Kimora, and I'm so excited to be back on here today. The past few weeks for me have been super busy. Last week we had finals, and that was super stressful, and I had a lot of studying to do, but I'm finally done. Now we are in winter break, which is so exciting. But today I want to talk about something that I've been struggling with and that I think is so important to talk about as believers, and that is finding your purpose in God. So, if you're anything like me, you've probably wondered, what am I here for? Or what is my ultimate purpose? And society often ties purpose into what we do, whether that's a sport, a certain career, or just being successful at something. But none of that is true. Our true purpose is to glorify God, to serve Him, and to just become more like Jesus. And I want to say a disclaimer before we even dive in. This is something that I personally struggle with. So I'm also speaking to myself. And I still find myself questioning my purpose or wondering if I am truly living for God. So I'm not perfect and I do not have all of the answers. But I think as believers, this is such an important conversation to have. And I hope that this conversation can just be encouraging for everyone listening and even for me. So, just jumping right in, um, I've had two major purposes that I believed for my life. And the first thing was being a cheerleader. I have been a cheerleader since I was 7, and for 14 years, I've just been chasing like the next big thing. So I did school cheer. I wanted to make varsity. I wanted to cheer football and basketball. I did all-star cheer. I wanted to make the next team. And then I wanted to be a college cheerleader. And I was doing all of those things. But like as I got older, it just wasn't as fulfilling. So recently, I decided that I needed to walk away from the cheer team. And that was one of the hardest decisions I've ever had to make. It was the biggest decision, and I put so much thought into it. And eventually, like being at cheer, I just wasn't the best version of myself. And it just no longer was aligning with how I want to be as a Christ follower, and it just was no longer aligning with my life, honestly. Like I want to do different things, and sometimes like it just felt like I was being held back from the time commitment that I had to put into cheer, and it wasn't fair for my teammates, my coaches, for me to be there and just not be fully in it. For so long, I identified as a cheerleader. My worth was tied into how I was performing or what my coach thought of me or how many like games that I went to. So now that I'm no longer a cheerleader, it can feel like this big part of me is missing. But like now, I am trying to just dive deeper into my relationship with Jesus and relearn that my value isn't tied into what I can do, but who I am as his child. God loves me not because of my performance as a cheerleader, but because of who he has made me to be. And I think that is sometimes very hard to believe, but when something is taken away from you, it can just feel like you don't know yourself or you've lost yourself, but that is just a lie. And that was kind of long. But the second thing was being a doctor. I used to think that my purpose in life was to become a doctor. I thought that the whole reason God made me was to eventually practice medicine. I went into college majoring in biology so then I could go to med school, so then I can eventually become a doctor. And again, as I grow up, it's just no longer aligning with my life. And sometimes that's a hard pill to swallow. And it would be so great if I was a doctor. But I've come to realize that my purpose isn't tied into one specific career, but to serve others, to love others, to show kindness, and to just reflect Jesus in everything that I do. So whether or not I eventually get a career in medicine or I do something else, my purpose is to be like Jesus, to love and serve others, and to just point people towards Him, to make disciples of all nations. Our purpose isn't found in what we do, but who we are becoming as we follow Christ and we reflect His love to the world and to others around us. And that's something that we can do in any role, in any season of life. I want to read this book. It is called 101 Essays That Will Change the Way You Think, and it's by Brianna Wiest. I'm not sure how to say it, but it's a great book. It's not a Christian book, it's just a regular book, but I think there's this chapter that is called Read This If You Don't Know What You're Doing with Your Life. And I think this can apply to a lot of people, so I want to read it. It starts with, if you ask any young adult what their primary stressor in life is, it's likely something that relates to uncertainty. If you were to boil it down to a sentence, it would be something along the lines of, I don't know what I'm doing with my life. How many times have you heard someone say that? How many times have you said that? Probably a lot. Nobody, not one of us, knows what we're doing with our lives. We can't summarize the big picture, not yet. We don't know what we'll be doing in 5 years, and pretending that we can predict that is not being responsible or ambitious. Do you know why you don't have the things you once thought you wanted? Do you know why you're not the person you once thought you'd be? Because you don't want those things anymore. And if you did, you'd have and you'd be them. And I think as followers of Christ, we can change that a little bit to, do you know why you don't have the things you once thought you wanted? Because Jesus does not want those things for you, either anymore, or His plan for your life was just completely different. And if Jesus did, you'd have those things. It says later on, what are you doing today? Who do you love? What intrigues you? What would you do today if you could be anyone you wanted? What do you want to do this weekend? And that's something that I struggle with, is just like, I'm so worried about what am I going to do after college, but I'm not concerned about like, what am I doing today? Like, the first step is just like getting through this semester and then getting through the year and then graduating. But it's like, I have to take those baby steps every single day instead of worrying about what am I going to do in next year or 5 years. And the last thing is, what do I want is a question you need to ask yourself every day. So as followers of Christ, we know that what we want today should align with God's will for our lives. Trusting in Jesus means surrendering our plans, our desires, and even our worries to Him, because He already knows what we need before we ask. Matthew 6:8. So instead of being consumed by fear and uncertainty about the future, we can lean into His promises. Jeremiah 29:11 reminds us that God has a plan for us, plans to prosper us and not to harm us, plans to give us hope in a future. So when we ask, what do I want today? I think we should also ask, what or how can I live today trusting in Jesus' plan for me? And this will shift your focus from trying to control every detail of our lives to walking in faith one day at a time. And this is something that I completely struggle with. Like, I try to control literally actually, I think my problem is I'm trying to control like so much of my future that I'm not worried about the details. And instead of trying to control these things, I should just be trusting in God's plan, because I had these ideas of what my purpose was for my life, and that has completely changed. And since I wasn't completely rooted in Jesus, now I'm like, what am I supposed to do? But the thing is, Jesus Himself tells us not to worry about tomorrow, because tomorrow will worry about itself. Matthew 6:34. So instead, we are called to seek first the kingdom and righteousness, trusting that everything else will fall into place. Matthew 6:33. Asking, what do I want today, will become less about our own desires and more about aligning our hearts to God's will. And then we will find joy and peace and purpose in the assurance that God has the future covered. That was this episode is supposed to be like about our purpose, but it's come a little bit of like worrying. But today at church, the pastor talked about Philippians 4. And in Philippians 4:6, it says, "Don't worry about anything, but in everything through prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God." So it says, do not worry about anything. If it's big enough to worry about, it is big enough to pray about. And I think that's like me, for example, when I'm so concerned about what is my purpose for life, it is because I am worrying about it. I'm not praying about it. And it says, pray about everything. And when you pray, peace from God is promised to you. The pastor said something today that was so good. It says, you will never worry yourself to peace, but you can pray yourself to peace. God is a God of peace. He gives you lasting peace, and I think that is so important. So our real purpose is to just glorify God, to become more like Him. Isaiah 43:7 says, "Everyone who is called by my name, whom I created for my glory, whom I formed and made." We were created for God's glory and not to just accomplish these worldly goals that we think that we want. Jesus gives us this clear purpose in Matthew 22:37 through 39. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. So, like our ultimate big purpose is to just love God fully and to love others in a way that reflects Him. And then everything else, our careers, our talents, and our passions will just be tools to serve that higher calling. So just going back to like, I thought I wanted to be a doctor for so long, and now I have no idea what I'm going to do when I graduate college. But no matter what career path I go into, like I just need to serve God. I just need to love others, to reflect Jesus, and like that will fulfill my full purpose no matter what career I'm in. And I want to be real. Like the world tells us the complete opposite. Everywhere that we look, there's messages that say you need to find your purpose in things like career, in success, in achievements, in social media followers. But the thing about those are they can all disappear in an instant. Titles, possessions, and popularity can fade, but God's purpose for us never changes. And I think that's where a lot of people, especially like Gen Z, get stuck because we're told find your passion, follow your dreams. And I'm also like, I'm not saying there's something wrong with like having goals. Like everyone should have goals, but I think it's very easy to start thinking that our worth is tied into how much we achieve. But when we root our purpose in Jesus, it's not about what we do, but why we do it. And when we live with that mindset, it will just change our everyday lives. It would shift how we see our lives. And it's not about waiting for this big moment to fulfill your purpose, but instead, we can glorify God in the little things, like how we treat people, how we respond to challenges, and even how we pursue our goals. And that's like a freeing feeling of you don't have to have everything figured out and you don't need to know exactly where your life is headed because you can just trust that God's plan is bigger than anything that you can ever imagine. Proverbs 19:21 says, "Many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails." So trusting in God's plan allows us to just let go of that pressure from family, from society, from yourself to just have all of these answers. You should take everything one step at a time, seek God in prayer, and just walk in faith. But like let's not forget that God has given us unique gifts and talents and we should be using those, but we should also use them to serve Him and to love others. When we do that, we're living out our purpose in a way that makes an eternal impact. So maybe the question isn't what is my purpose, but it's more so how can I glorify God today? Because when we start living with that question in mind, everything will change. Because it's not about the future or what you're going to do when you graduate college, but it's about trusting God with today and letting Him guide us step by step. And like I just want to say, living with this mindset is not easy. I still struggle with it, as I've said a million times, but like the world tells us otherwise. But you can stay focused on God's purpose for your life by first seeking God first and foremost. In Matthew 6:33 it says, "But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well." So start with prayer. Ask God to realign your heart with his will and read the scripture, learn more about who Jesus is. Like, how can you become more like Jesus if you don't even know who he is? So read the scripture. And second, recognize the temporary nature of this life. In 2 Corinthians 4:18, it reminds us, "So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal." And when we remember that this life is short, this life is temporary, it helps us focus on what truly matters, and that's eternity with God. And when you shift that mindset, you can use your gifts for the kingdom. God gave us unique talents and opportunities, so no matter what you're passionate about, just use that as a way to serve God and to glorify Him. But I want to change a little bit of what we're talking about. We're talking about purpose in life, like your true, full purpose. But what is like the purpose through pain? So, wherever you are in life, if you're uncomfortable, if you're in pain, first listen to what you're asking God for, and then you will realize that He is putting you through what you are praying for. So, if you want this certain thing, know that you have to go through this to get that certain thing. He puts you through obstacles so that you can be prepared mentally and physically, emotionally, because He can't just always give it to you. And even I've questioned, God, why me? God, why can't you just make things easy? But you have to shift your mindset to, God, I have no idea what you're doing, but I trust you. And I trust that your plan is bigger than anything that I can imagine. And later, I will understand why I had to go through that. John 13:7 says, "You do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand." So God gives us a full purpose, a life purpose to just be more like Him, to love others, to serve others, to glorify God in all that you do and all of the talents and opportunities that He has given you. And you will be able to live a life with Jesus in eternity. And when you have to go through pain and obstacles, it's really hard to trust that God has a plan and that God has a purpose for that. But when you truly trust God, you will shift your mindset to, God, later I will understand why I had to go through this, and I trust you. But that's all that I have. And as we wrap up today, I just want to leave you with this thought that your purpose is not something that you have to search endlessly for, because it has already been given to you by God. But yeah, make sure you guys follow Hot Girls Pray podcast on TikTok and on Instagram and Spotify and YouTube and all of the good things. And I really pray that this was something that you needed to hear. And if you made it this far, thank you so much for listening. Okay, see you next time. Bye.